Hello again, everyone. This is Steve Kallas, speaking of sports, and I'm here to talk about the late, great Lou Brock, who passed away earlier this week at the age of 81. You probably know the numbers: 3,023 hits, 938 stolen bases, played in three World Series, won two of them with the Cardinals. Um, the three World Series all went 7 games, and I'm going to read you Lou Brock's stat line in the World Series in a minute or so. But first, a few other things about Lou Brock. He broke Ty Cobb's single season record. He broke Ty Cobb's all-time stolen base record. And he would be beaten eventually by Rickey Henderson. But Lou Brock was a trailblazer in a lot of ways. And I think the most interesting way to me is Lou Brock was the first leadoff hitter ever to hit at least 20 home runs and steal at least 50 bases. And he really set the tone for what we have today, which is oftentimes, frankly, the home run hitting leadoff man who's got speed. Rickey Henderson eventually perfected that as a leadoff man who stole even more bases than Lou Brock. But Brock was the first guy. It was kind of unheard of before that, where your leadoff man and your number two hitter were usually, table setters, they used to call them. Now it's OBP, on base guys, that kind of stuff. But Brock was really the first of that group. Some of you know that Lou Brock was a Chicago Cub the first 2.5 years in the National League and was traded for Ernie Broglio. Broglio had been a 20-game winner for the Cards. Brock had been a 263 hitter for the Cubs. And many people at the time thought it was lopsided because the Cubs were getting a 20-game winner. In fact, it turned out to be the most lopsided trade ever the other way, because Broglio did very little for the Cubs, and Lou Brock became Lou Brock, the Hall of Famer. So most of the comments, he was a beloved Cardinal, but a lot of the comments were, he was the toughest guy I ever saw. There were comments like Red Schoendienst, who was his manager, who is still alive at 95, said he was the toughest guy I ever saw. A number of teammates said never saw a tougher guy. Tim McCarver, who is Bob Gibson's personal catcher and later a baseball announcer, said Brock and Gibson are the two toughest guys I've ever seen. And I'm going to give you an example of his toughness in a few minutes that I think you'll find interesting, that virtually nobody spoke about in the wake of his death. The first thing I want to do is actually read his World Series stat line. And I knew Lou Brock was good in the World Series, but I didn't know he was this good. So he played in 64 against the Yankees, and they won in 64 and 67. They lost to the Tigers in 1968. And here are the Brock stats: 21 games in the World Series, obviously the biggest stage of all. He had 34 hits and 87 at-bats. That's an average of 391. His OBP was 424. His slugging was 655. And combined, his OPS, which is, that's the stat that everyone uses today. Slugging plus on-base percentage is OPS, and his OPS was 1.079. The only three guys to have a higher OPS for guys who played more than 20 World Series games are named Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Reggie Jackson. So you get the point. And Brock wasn't even considered a power hitter, but he did have great power. Lou Brock was only one of 4 people, 3 major leaguers, and Luke Easter, who did it in the Negro Leagues, to hit a home run into center field of the Polo Grounds. And when we say center field at the Polo Grounds, for you real old-timers, or you history buffs, the Polo Grounds in dead center had the clubhouse. You couldn't hit a home run into the bleachers at the clubhouse, but on either side of the clubhouse, again in dead center field, they had bleachers to the right, bleachers to the left. Lou Brock, Hank Aaron, and Joe Adcock, another booming power hitter, all were major leaguers who hit the ball there. So Brock is only one of 3 major leaguers and 4 people ever. Again, Luke Easter was a prodigious home run hitter in the Negro Leagues and in the minor leagues. So Brock did have power, but I think these guys choose, a guy like an Ichiro or Wade Boggs, those guys could have home runs if they wanted to. Ty Cobb could hit home runs if he wanted to. But I think Lou Brock had more power than all of those guys. And now I want to talk about a fascinating thing I found out about Lou Brock and his toughness. You've heard the story that Koufax broke Lou Brock's arm, or he was mad at him for bunting, or whatever that was about. And here's the real story. And it's partly like that. On May 26th, 1965, and I went back and looked at all the games Koufax pitched against the Cardinals back then. May 26th, 1965, Lou Brock played in that game. Sandy Koufax pitched. Dodgers against the Cardinals, obviously. Uh, Brock's line is 1 for 2 with a hit by a pitch. And he came out of the game early. He was replaced. You can see that when you look at the box score. And so, as the real story goes, Brock stole not 1 base, not 2 base, but 3 bases. He stole second and third on Koufax and Jeff Torborg, and he also stole second in a different at bat. Maybe after he got hit, because he was only on base twice before he was taken out of the game. So he gets hit in the shoulder. He goes to first. He steals at least second. I can't tell you if he stole second and third both times. It might have been his prior at bat when he singled. And then he came out of the game. After the game, it was discovered that Koufax had broken Lou Brock's shoulder. He had a broken shoulder. And Bob Gibson wrote a book where he said Koufax told Gibson that when he threw at Lou Brock, which he did intentionally by Koufax's own admission, it was the only guy he ever threw at intentionally in his whole career. He was so aggravated that a guy could get on the bases, and Jackie Robinson had been like that, and Ty Cobb had been like that, and Brock could wreck a game with his legs. And that's what he did that day, stealing 3 bases, being twice on base, and breaking his shoulder. That was May 26, 1965. Brock didn't play on the 27th, the 28th, or the 29th. He missed 3 days. And then on May 30th, 1965, he pinch ran. So he was back in the lineup 4 days later with a broken shoulder. And the day after that, May 31st, 1965, Lou Brock took the field and played his regular position for the rest of the season. Now, some people say that really hurt him. He was hitting .315 when he got hit in the shoulder and broke his shoulder, and he hit .288 for the year. So maybe that probably did have some kind of negative effect on him. But just to show you how tough a guy is with a broken shoulder to come back into the lineup 4 days later after a broken shoulder by Sandy Koufax, one of the hardest throwers ever, you get the point about toughness. He was also tough later in life. He had a lot of issues. He had diabetes. He had a leg amputated in 2015. But revered, well-loved, and very tough, as well as a great Hall of Fame baseball player. That was Lou Brock. This is Steve Kallas, speaking of sports. We'll see you the next time.